Good afternoon and welcome to the Army SBIR Catalyst Program overview for FY25. We're going to get started with remarks from Dr. Matthew Willis, the Director of the Army Prize Competitions and Army SBIR Sitter Program. Dr. Willis?
Thanks, Nicole. And thanks everyone for joining this afternoon or morning or wherever you are, whatever time it is. I'm excited to have this discussion this afternoon. So we're going to be talking about the Army SBIR Catalyst Program, as well as some exciting changes for FY25, where I think we've heard feedback from the community, from small businesses, large businesses, our Army stakeholders. And I think we're really shifting some of the programs so we can still meet the intent of really helping to scale SBIR drive technologies towards transition, while also structuring the program in a way that's a bit more realistic in terms of partnership and matching funding, composition, etc. So I'm going to hand it over to Ms. Nicole Fox, who is my lead for the Catalyst Program Initiative, to get us started. And I think there will be some Q&A at the end here. Thanks.
Thank you, Dr. Willis. Good afternoon, everyone. It's great to have you here, and we are definitely excited about kicking off the new Catalyst FY25. So as Dr. Willis noted, we definitely have some changes, and we'll be discussing those as we go through the slide presentation today. We do have time left over at the end for Q&A, so I will do my best to get through this material so that we have time to chat at the end. Nicole, if you could go to the next slide, please. So as we know, the SBIR program, we're into igniting big innovation. We're trying to break down those barriers so that you, the small business, have the best way of working with the Army. We want to make sure that your ability to be able to have those conversations with the right people, so that way your technology can move from point A to point B in a quick, fast way, so that way we're able to get that information, that R&D to the hands of our warfighters faster, as well as you being able to move forward quickly as a small business. So that is a big thing for us to be able to do as well. So during this, we are trying our best to make sure that we are meeting your needs as a small business. That is what some of the updates for the Catalyst program today entail, as well as making sure that we have the right subject matter experts to be able to guide you through the programs that we are developing. Nicole, next slide, please. So with the Army SBIR STIR program, as you can see from the slide here, there is many on-roads, off-roads to be able to get into the program. And most of you today, I'm assuming, have had at least one, if not several SBIRs along your journey as a small business. So many ways of getting in is usually starting with a phase 1. We do have direct to phase 2. As well as going into your second phase 2, and then potentially moving into the Catalyst program. So we have been able to utilize some of our best maneuvers, new ways of trying to do business, trying to be flexible in how we are doing it. And that's one reason why we have direct to phase 2 now. So that way some technologies that are further along in the TRL can skip over that feasibility study and go straight to a prototype. As well as some technologies are not far enough along in that TRL, need a little bit more R&D, and that's where we pull in that sequential phase 2. But as we all know, some technologies hit the road running and running hard, and that does mean that there is ample opportunity, and in some cases, it is the perfect time to hit the Catalyst program, and that's what we're here today to talk about. But I also want to be sure that I mentioned phase 3. That is where there's no longer any competition. That's where you get to work directly with the government consumer, that customer that you get to work with, and they don't have to go to a SBIR contract any longer. They can go do a contract directly with you. But we'll be providing more phase 3 information to our general public as we go forward. So getting excited to be able to provide that information in the near future. Nicole, next slide, please. All right, so how did the Catalyst program start off and get running? Well, back in FY22, the Honorable Gabe Camarillo from the United Secretary of the Army announced 5 initiatives to incentivize the major weapon systems, integrate and collaborate for small business and non-traditional innovation firms. That's where Catalyst was developed, and it kicked off back in FY22. So we're going to be showing today that that program is continuing now in FY25. We're excited that it's continuing on its pathway, but we've also had some updates that we'll be discussing momentarily. These initiatives that we have are here to incentivize integrators and prime contractors to transition innovative technologies, to move them past a pilot program, to move them past that prototype stage and actually have something that is usable. So it's basically, as we like to say, it catapults you further along, and to be able to move your idea into a definite feasibility, past that into a prototype, past that into something that is being manufactured and utilized. Next slide, please, Nicole. All right, let's talk about some of the Catalyst basics. So many of you today might be new to the Catalyst program and you're still wondering exactly what is this. So we're looking to have 3 partners underneath the Catalyst program. One of those being you, the small business. And we're also looking for someone within the DoD, the Army transition partner, but that has to be within the DoD Army, of course. And also as well as possibly not possibly, we're going to need to have an integrator who potentially could be prime or an OEM. So we need to have those 3 partners come to the table with funding. Small business doesn't need funding. Those funds will be coming from the SBIR program. So what happens is we're looking to have that Army transition partner, which in a lot of cases is a program executive office, but we do take funding from other Army labs and other places who are able to bring those dollars to the table. So they can invest up to $3.5 million that will be matched. They can go beyond that, but it will only be matched up to that amount. And the integrator is also required to bring up to $3.5 million to the table. Again, it doesn't have to be that full 3.5. It can be over 3.5, but the SBIR program will only match up to that. So what we're looking at there is having those 3 partners be able to work together to reduce risk, to bring technology faster, to make sure that it is going where it needs to go within the Army and that we're meeting those needs along the way. And those needs go back down to our technical objective. What are we supposed to be getting out of this relationship? And we're ultimately trying to develop, mature, deploy, and transition technology prototypes within this program. So doing that, we can test, we can demonstrate, we can propose new things that the program executive office is looking for that they might need to go forward to put in their program of record. They're like, this is the technology that we're on the cusp of moving faster. We know additional funding is coming down the pike. We want to make sure that we're ready and earmarked with this technology in hand. That's when they start searching out and they're like going, we have funds to spend. We're looking for the right technology. That marriage happens. They find the small business. You, the small business, find your integrator partner, and that could be, for example, like, I don't want to put anyone on the spot, but we're going to throw Raytheon under the bus today, and they come in to decide we're going to put some funding together and we're going to make this happen. So that is some things that we can work on, and we'll give some additional examples later on as well. But we want to make sure when we're doing this, what is the impact we're making? How is this demonstratable? What does the Army need? How is that integrator helping that small business? How is that integrator working to make this technology move forward? And what is the small business doing? What technology are they bringing to the table? How are they utilizing their flexible approach as a small business to be able to do exactly what the Army needs to do to push this technology through some of those barriers? So again, that's one reason when we have all these 3 partners who have different ways of doing business, different ideas, different composites, and then we bring them together in this marriage is a good way to look at it, for everybody bringing something to the table to be able to have that full partnership. So we'll be discussing what that looks like a little bit further. So if we can go to the next slide, Nicole, that would be great. I want to give a few examples of what happened in FY23. We kicked off this program with stars in our eyes, and it was a great kickoff. We received over 65 proposal submissions from all these different small businesses who had great ideas, great things for the Army, great technologies. And the selection, as you might imagine, was hard. But we did settle on selecting 5 firms. Those 5 firms are here. All of them are in their second year of their catalyst. They're moving forward successfully. We've had some that are more successful than others, and it has been quite an adventure along the way. But it is through these 5 companies here that we learned a lot, that we developed some ways, and they were very vocal in ways that we could do the program better. And those are some, we took that advice to heart to make sure that we are doing the best for you, the small business, because if you're successful, we're successful, and vice versa. So because of that, you're going to see here that we only received 6 proposals in FY24, and you're just like going, wow, that's a huge drop. What happened different? Why was that the case? Well, with any program, a lot of the times we see it's a possibility of receiving $15 million. Who doesn't want to jump in on that? And that is what happened during year 1. But we wanted to make sure that when the firms were jumping into this endeavor, that they knew what they're getting into. So part of what we developed back in FY24 is an application process. That application is not a pre-selection. It's basically making sure all 3 parties, the Army transition partner, the integrator, and the small business, all know what they're getting into. That means to make sure that there's potential funding to be had, when that funding is expected, what that small business relationship with that integrator looks like. And that's a relationship that the integrator and small business make on their own. The government stays out of that relationship. And we discuss what those things are. We go through some situations, some different scenarios, and talk through the process to find out, is this the best time? Is this the best technology for this? So we for that, through those initial interviews, we've discovered that a lot of the firms ended up backing out, or the transition partner did, and it wasn't because they didn't like the program. They realized they're not ready yet to make that big step or that big leap forward into utilizing Catalyst. So a lot of them, they want to wait and make sure that they have everything aligned for those next steps. So we're anticipating actually more submissions this fiscal year because of that. So in FY24, as you can see, we did receive these 3 additional selections. They're all in contracting now. They have not been awarded yet. And they were all based on this initial application process. So the integrator was confirmed, the transition partner was confirmed, the small business knows what's going to be happening when these different pieces are falling into place. So we were able to untap some of this knowledge early on to make sure that we were instructing the small business, the transition partner, meaning our government Army counterpart, as well as the integrator, who could be the prime or the OEM. So we had a lot of discussions, and that's one thing we do a little bit differently, but I'll talk about our contracting part of this in just a bit. But there's lots of ways to pull in different resources as well. Your integrator normally is a PEO, or your integrator is normally your prime and or an OEM, but in some cases, it could be someone like NASA. They are not Army. They are bringing something to the table to assist that small business and bringing forward manufacturing that technology, making it work for them. So in that case, that scenario, that could also work. In other cases, we've had more than one integrator who's come to the table. They can also come together with more than one, deciding so that there's a different relationship coming with there. We've also had it where it is the small business is looking to have integrator coming in at a different cadence than the initial one. We're working with the beginning part of the integrator, and 6 months later, a different integrator is coming to the table. Those types of scenarios are also welcome. But again, as we're going to go through some discussions today, every technology, every contract, every small business is different. And we want to make sure that we are being flexible and open and transparent with all of those. So that is something we have working, and we're trying to ensure that those relationships are strong and secure going forward. Nicole, next slide, please. Fantastic. So what's new in FY25? So any of you who've been around a little bit, you're going to see that we've had some changes. And a lot of those changes had to do with information we received from you, the small business, as well as our transition partners. Even our Army folks were going, we need this to change. This needs to be able to work better. Integrators gave us insight. They're just like going, what is this program? What do we tell? What is this supposed to be? So that is where we came up with some of these things to make sure that we are assisting all parties, because this program was not put into place to make sure it was unreachable. It's put into place to help the Army be able to do what it needs to do, and that's pulling you, the small business, and these partners together to be able to do something great. So one thing that we have started doing is rolling submissions. It started back in FY24, but it does continue in FY25. We take the submission when the transition partner, small business, and integrator is ready. If that's next week, fantastic. If that's 6 months to a year from now, that is okay. Anytime we take those, we look at those applications first off, and that's when it starts from that point forward. So again, that submission process, those conversations can start as early or as late, depending on where you are within that pathway. So we want to make sure that that's clear. So we also have it that the prior SBIR award does not have to be with Army. So if you have won something with Air Force, Navy, NIH, and you have an Army transition partner who's like, ooh, I want that. We want to take this on. We want to put some money on that. We know exactly where this technology is going to go next. We can do just that. So we just want to make it clear it does not have to be an Army topic. We can take it from elsewhere. Your current, and if you have phase 2 sequential selectee, they also will be eligible for a catalyst enhancement. That is new too. So if you've received a phase 2 sequential or second phase 2, you can also apply to the catalyst program. There is a nuance there that we'll talk about in the next slide. So we also have the ability within the Catalyst program, and this would be shown in a broad agency announcement for a direct-to-phase 2 Catalyst award. And there would be no prior award required for that, but it would be something posted within a broad agency announcement. That topic would be developed internally to Army, and you would know who the transition partner is for that direct-to-phase 2. Currently, we do not have any published within the BAA, and there isn't any coming within the next month. But if that does happen, you will see that within a broad agency announcement, and further instructions on how to submit to a direct-to-phase 2 Catalyst award will be included within that. But again, that's the only one that you do not need a prior SBIR award to be able to go into that direct-to-phase 2 Catalyst. Also, probably the biggest changes that you're going to see underneath the program happen for the integrator. So integrators, listen up. If we have any of you primes or OEMs out there, this was put into place to assist you and the small business. So what we require underneath the Catalyst program is for the integrator or integrators to be able to give up to $3.5 million towards that small business. We do require a direct funding transfer from that integrator to the small business. Our government contracting office does not require us to be involved in your relationship. That's between you and your integrator. That's where hands off. All we need to know is having documentation that there was dollars from the prime OEM or whoever that integrator is, dollars from their account now into the small business's account. So that's what we need to see. But we've also allowed it too that you can now have a private capital investment may be allowed, but only with approval from our contracting center of excellence or our source selection authority. This is again case by case, but again, every catalyst submission is case by case. So this would be something that we discussed during the initial application, and it can be discussed throughout the contracting life cycle. But this again has to be pre-approved as we go forward, and that percentage of how much funding, that's also to be determined. But for a venture capital to be one of the integrators, you still have to have a regular integrator involved in there, someone who's basically going to be able to mentor you, the small business, and bringing your technology forward into the manufacturing realm. That's part of what the Catalyst program is meant to to do is you're working with that large company or that integrator who's already worked within the Department of Defense, so that way you can get the accolades from being able to move forward and transition your technology. So that is part of what we're looking for within Catalyst. Another thing that we do allow now within your integrator is to do in-kind donations, or private capital may be allowed. So you can do in-kind within that for that integrator. That was not allowed previously, just like venture capitalists. In-kind, again, the total amount that's going to be doing, what exactly that in-kind donation looks like, that description of what in-kind is something that will be discussed during the application process. So we don't look at in-kind as that we're going to have that your prime is going to give you space to do meetings. That's not in-kind donation. We want to make sure that what that in-kind donation is actually incentivizing, moving that technology forward. How is that in-kind donation pushing that technology through, those windows of opportunity? So again, it's going to be something that we discussed and does need to be approved by our Contracting Center of Excellence as well as the Source Selection Authority. So a combination of all three of these is allowed by approval. So ultimately, we're just looking for that integrator, but these other caveats are allowed within that. How much, what that looks like is going to be done by case basis. So this is on the small business to locate their integrator, as well as what that relationship looks like, as well as if they decide to use a venture capital or not. And again, what that relationship might look like and what that small business may or may not be giving up for that relationship, as well as if there's in-kind donations. What does that mean? What is exactly the small business getting out of that in-kind donation? And all of these relationships, how is that moving that technology forward? So this is something we have to clearly articulate when we're working forward with that application process to make sure that we have all those check marks done within the program. Okay, Nicole, if you could go to the next slide, please. All right, the award structure. This is probably the most difficult part of trying to understand what's allowed and what's not allowed. So one thing that we do when we submit the application is, again, these applications can only come from the transition partner. I wanted to make that clear early on. The transition partner is the Army, who is the one who's moving the need forward. This is out of something Army needs. They're going to you, the small business, saying, hey, we like what you have, so we're going to recommend you for this Catalyst program. Do you have an integrator that you want to take on board? And that's where this whole thing starts. So that application process, you will be working with me throughout this as well, so that we can discuss what that plan, that process is going forward, and what some of those funding amounts could potentially happen underneath the program. So if you currently have a phase 1 or a phase 2, you are eligible for a phase 2 or phase 2 sequential catalyst, which is up to $15 million. There is a base year under the catalyst, which is 6 to 12 months, up to $1 million. That $1 million is SBIR funding only. And you're just like going, okay, so what do we do with this 6 to 12 months? Well, the 6 to 12 months is for you to continue to secure relationships with your transition partner as well as your integrator. And it also gives your transition partner and integrator time to be able to get funding through their chain. So that way things can happen on time and in sequence. It also gives you, the small business, time to perform additional testing to make sure that everybody has the warm and fuzzies of the R&D that is being accomplished. So sometimes there's like 1 additional test or 2 additional tests, or we need to take this to XYZ location and plug and play. Is this going to work? Is this going to meet the needs that we have? And we get to the end of that 6 or 12 months and suddenly transition partner Army is like, it's not working. We want to back out. They have the ability to do so. Same thing with your integrator. This isn't working. They can back out. So that's one reason why we set up this initial 6 to 12 months. We're looking again for the strongest possibility of moving forward to commercialization. There's other aspects of the SBIR program to utilize if you really think that it's very high risk. This one test is basically do or die. Maybe this is not, the Catalyst program isn't for you. But again, those are conversations we can have as well. So during that 6 to 12 months, it's usually everybody getting on the same page, moving forward, continue with some additional R&D. And then when that ends, that's when that catalyst enhancement, which is an IDIQ contract, goes into play. And that is where we're expecting funds to come from your Army transition partner and funding's coming from your integrator. And it can come in at any cadence that works for them. It's a little bit tricky for our contracting office, our CCOE, to be able to move some of these pieces. So you as a small business have to be as open and honest and transparent with that cadence, so that way they can work with you to make sure that those funds are coming in, so that way the SBIR program can match those funds. So that's how we can do 3.5 million transition partner, 3.5 million to your integrator, which is your 7 million. SBIR marches that with 7 million. That's your total of 14, and your 1 million base year. That's how you can get up to $15 million with your catalyst. As I mentioned earlier in the presentation, we have the ability to have a catalyst awarded to a company who's already received a sequential or second phase 2. But the problem is with those particular contracts, they've maxed out their SBIR dollars. So since they've maxed that out, it's just like, we can't give you anything additional under that, except for where the waiver of the SBA comes in place for the Catalyst program. So that means no base award. But usually by then, everybody's on board. You can, again, the Catalyst program can come into play when the transition partner integrator are ready. So that means you could be working with these folks behind the scenes. You could be pulling Nicole in and having some meetings. And all of a sudden we have Army transition partner, boom, they have funds, integrator, we're ready to rock and roll. We can go ahead and move forward with that contract or with that partnership at that time, because at the time of the award, that's when we'd have to have the integrator and transition partner bring funding to the table. Say that was 2 million from the transition partner, 2 million from the integrator, and then Army SBIR would come in with 4 million. And that's how we could move forward with it if you've already had a second phase 2. So again, that is an opportunity to do so. And again, if there's some different cadences, different funding that you might be looking at, if you're the transition partner or the integrator, we can talk about how that may look, depending on how we're moving forward. So, and we can give some examples towards the end. I just want to make sure that we have some time to get through all of these slides. Nicole, next slide, please. Thank you. So, as I mentioned earlier, there is the direct to phase 2 catalyst option that comes through the BAA. So that's our broad agency announcement. That is where we see our normal Army topics that I'm sure many of you have seen already, where you see your phase 1s, your phase 2s. Those are where we go to see the need from the Army, and we, the small business, are coming forward to say, I have the solution to that. So in this case, an Army transition partner will say, PEO STRI has this need, and they're just like going, hey, we have some money, let's think about using this catalyst program. So they develop a topic with the goal in mind that at the end of this direct to phase 2, that they're going to kickstart and work with that small business who's awarded to start having the catalyst option come in then. So they have a direct need, instead of looking out going, oh, these are my needs, these are my things. They have something specific that has not gone through the SBIR program previously. They're making a brand new topic, and that way you, the small business, can answer, and your transition partner would be known up front. You would also need to come to the table with an integrator, but that's something you'd be able to work through during your direct to phase 2 contract. So again, this has not come into play yet, but the opportunity and the availability to do an award structure like this is definitely available. And also, just to let everyone know in our audience, this is open to any US-based small businesses, but you have to be at least 51% owned and operated, and you have to be located here within the US. So if you have any questions regarding your eligibility, if you have not previously been part of the SBIR program, please reach out to our help desk. We'll be glad to assist you with any questions you may have. Next slide, please, Nicole. All right, the application process. I've been talking about this application since we began. You're like, okay, what does this look like? What does this entail? So the application is not a private document. We can send it to you, the small business, and basically it goes through your current contract information, where your technology fits, and the technologies that we're looking for that can be eligible within the Catalyst have to fall within one of our 5 technology priority areas. That is within AI/ML, sensors, clean tech, immersive and wearables, as well as contested logistics and sustainment. So if your technology does not fit within one of those areas, unfortunately is not eligible for the Catalyst program. If in doubt, please reach out. But ultimately, with this application that you're going to be doing, it's going to talk about where the technology, where it started, where it's going, how Catalyst is going to benefit the Army and the small business, who that integrator is, what type of funding you're expecting. Again, we don't expect to have someone bring, a signed dotted check saying this is the money all ready to go. This, again, is just the application to get us started. Conversations will be had after that. You'll meet with us to make sure that, again, everything is in order. And the application, if you submit it once, it doesn't meet muster, doesn't mean, oh, you're done, you're out of there. No, you're more than welcome if your transition partner wants to resubmit it, or if they want to wait another year and they'll resubmit it, then you are more than welcome to do so. Again, it's just an application for us to have a conversation to make sure that, everything within the program is meeting the criteria, because we don't want you to go forward and submit this as your phase 2 or as your second phase 2, because if that's the case, you submit and you don't get selected, you've lost your opportunity to submit a sequential or your phase 2 altogether. So that's also something we discussed during the application process, to make sure that you know what your options are and that they're clearly articulated to you, so that way you're making the best decision for yourself as a small business. Okay, so the application can actually be completed by you, the small business, but again, has to be submitted to the Army SBIR office email as noted there by the transition partner. So again, we want to make sure the transition partner is well aware, they are on board, and we start having those conversations early and often. If after we go through that application process, you, the small business, yep, we're ready to go. The integrator's like, yep, we're ready to go. The transition partner like, yep, we're ready to go. We get that through all the process. Everybody's good. On a request for proposal will come out. Actually, it no longer comes from our CCOE. We are now able to use the DSIP system. So the same place that you've submitted your initial phase 1, your phase 2, or even your second phase 2, exact same portal. Instructions will come through an email, and you will also have access to myself during that process. And the reason for it is because there's additional documentation that you have not seen previously with your phase 2s. There's some additional funding documents required, additional certificates that need to be completed, and you've gone through a lot to get to this point. We want to make sure that everything is completed. So you will have access to me to assist you. I will not look at your technical aspect of your proposal, but I will assist you in making sure that those documents are completed correctly, to make sure that their I's are dotted and T's are crossed. So that way we have a successful submission. So I just wanted to give everyone that heads up that we don't just wish you best of luck and hope this comes forward. Again, we're all putting a lot into the status of these proposals. We want to make sure that they go forward successfully. And in case you were interested in just submitting your proposal and hoping the best would come out of it, we do not, unfortunately, accept unsolicited proposals. They have to, again, as I mentioned, go through the transition partner or that Army partner, in most cases a PEO. Nicole, next slide, please. Okay, proposal recommendations. So again, as I mentioned, the proposal submission is a little bit different. So we're looking for a strong proposal package, which includes letters of support from your transition partner as well as your integrator. Those two individuals, potentially more, who would potentially invest funding into your technology. The stronger the support letter, the stronger aptitude you have for a selection. So make sure that you spend that time to ensure you have those. Some of our small businesses did this very early to make sure they had them both on working with them prior to some of our initial conversations, because they wanted to make sure they had everything completed. We don't require that. Again, it's work that's outside of, you know, the contract, but it's just a possibility that you might want to think about doing that, making sure that you, the small business, have everything in order. You have to be sure that you, when you're submitting your proposal, especially during that technical part of it, that's really where we're diving into, is you need to demonstrate what exactly is going to be able to be completed and that it's going to meet the gap in the technical priorities of the Army. When in doubt, ask that technical POC you've been working with to make sure that you're meeting their needs and that you're just not moving a technology forward because it meets the need of your organization. We do expect it to have dual use. We understand that, but we also want to make sure that you are answering both of those parameters. That if you need to answer things for that prime and you need to answer things for the small bit for the transition partner, both of those need to be articulated within that proposal so that it's clear and concise of exactly what the small business is doing. We're also wanting to make sure that you have a clear transition plan. It's not just about receiving funding and doing great things and having this wonderful, you know, widget that you're able to manufacture at the end. It's about what are you going to do next? How are you going to take this to fruition? Who else might you be able to transition this to? Do you have other partners that you can work this through? What is that dual use? What are you going to do with this technology? How is it going to be able to help you, the small business, grow financially? So we want to make sure that you've put some thought behind that and that you have things set up. So again, those are the main priorities that we're looking for. Again, clear, demonstrable impact and transition. That is the best line to take out of this to make sure that you're doing that when you submit your proposal. Next slide, please. All right, evaluation criteria. I know this is always the hard one. Everyone's like, okay, exactly what does this mean? So we're looking at commercialization and transition. We're just like, well, that's kind of the same thing. That's 50%. Yeah, that's 50% because that's what we're looking for. We already know you can do what you're saying you can do. If not, you wouldn't be here. You wouldn't be at the Catalyst. You wouldn't have made it this far because your technology is going well. People have seen it. Army people are interested. Integrators are interested in what you're doing. So you know technically you're there. That's going to be probably the easiest part to prove to us. But how are you going to transition this? How are you going to be able to move this out of just this idea bank and move it into something that could potentially go into a program of record? What are some things that you're doing? Have you talked to the right people? Who are those right people? Who are you meeting with? What do you know about? Have you been able to do this previously? What did you do with that? What are some problems that you ran into and how are you going to mitigate those? So really be careful about how you are articulating these things and think about those processes forward because those are, again, some of the big things that we're looking at. Firmability, 15%. It's easy to look at here. Again, you wouldn't be where you were unless you were a good firm. But again, there's going to be people who are going to be looking at your proposal who might not know you that well. So you need to let us know, does the folks who are working this, do they have the ability to do what is stated within the technical bandwidth? As well as, do you have people on your team who have the ability to transition or commercialize? That could be something for you to think about as well. Do we have everybody in our pool who has the ability, bandwidth, wherewithal to be able to move what we're doing further down and to basically, you know, push our small business into doing some really great things? So again, that's something you have to be able to think about, put in the back of your head. And we do spell out this even further in the actual package that you will receive from our office. So I'll be glad to go through this even deeper with those of you who potentially will get an RFP out of this. As well as I mentioned at the very beginning, how is this going to meet the Army priorities? How is this technology going to push our Army into being that force to be reckoned with? What is it within your technology that's going to do that? How well does it fit within our technology areas that I mentioned earlier? And what is it going to do for that? What is it going to do for Army? So again, these are the things that we're looking at when we review your proposal. Nicole, next slide, please. All right, great. Just as I mentioned, our Catalyst is open We had our open session today. You can submit proposals at any time. Really, that comes from the transition partner. But if anyone's interested in getting a copy of that application just to get an idea of what it looks like, we'll be glad to get that to you. And our selected proposals for FY25 should be awarded no later than 30 September. But again, it depends on timing. So we receive these ad hoc throughout the fiscal year. So our goal is to do 30 September, but if you have a proposal that gets submitted in August, that's just not realistic. So just let you know, it might happen to go into the next fiscal year. So we do take applications at any time, but our goal, of course, is to have these ordered by the end of this fiscal year. Next slide, please. All right, so this is how you can work with us. But I also wanted to take a moment and just give a few different scenarios of what has worked with some of our Catalyst awardees to date. I will leave names and situations out of it, mostly because they have not been informed about what I'm talking about. And again, these are just scenarios that to the best of that are based on actual things that happened, but I just want to give you some idea of some of what has transpired during the program. So for instance, we've had small businesses who come forward and they have their integrators who are working with them. They have their transition partner. Everything's going great. And they get to that catalyst part of it, that everything's going fantastic. And we have the integrators jump ship. What happens to the contract? And I'm sure everybody here is concerned about that because there's nothing beholding that integrator to stay with you. What is it that you, the small business, are going to be able to do? So in those cases, we still allow the small business to continually search for and acquire another integrator. We do our best to make sure that we work with you, that we can help mitigate those issues, as well as our transition partner. So again, the stronger relationship you have with your transition partner, that is also going to benefit you. So making sure that you are well aware of the ask and the need is what we can help you with moving forward. As well as we've had the relationship. I can't stress this enough. That relationship between the integrator and the small business is between you two. We can't get involved in that. There's a possibility that you, the small business, may decide to give up some of your data rights. Again, that is on you, the small business, to make those decisions. We, the government, cannot tell you one way or another. So it is in your best interest to make sure you do your due diligence prior to making any type of relationship guarantees. And I'll just leave it at that. There are, as a small business, we've had some who had their integrator and the transition partner, and both of them came to the table with funding, and then they just didn't have any more right away. So they had to wait. It's an IDIQ contract. Funding can come in as task orders. So that doesn't, you can have an additional task order that gets put on later in that 2-year period of your catalyst. So it's possible to get another transition partner to come in later on, or another integrator to come in later on during that same contract to be able to utilize that contracting vehicle. It just needs to make sure that it's staying within the same topic requirement and that we're still meeting the needs of the original proposal. We also have contracting officers who specialize in Catalyst, who are working specifically for this and who are fantastic at helping you through some of the difficulties that may arise. And I just want to, definitely give you that out there, that it's not just about us making sure that we're doing our, it looks good for the Army. We also want to make sure that for the small business that you are certainly engaged as well as informed throughout the entire process. But I do notice we only have about 16 minutes left, and I want to make sure we have enough time for Q&A. So I will pass this back over to Nicole.
Thanks, Nicole. A little confusing, both Nicoles. So we did have quite a few questions that came in during the webinar, so we're going to start there, as I think they will mostly impact those who are online. So one of the first questions was, can the SBC also act as integrator for the Catalyst Award?
No, the small business concern cannot be the integrator. They have to have outside investment.
Thanks, Nicole.
Sure.
The next question, does phase 2 sequential mean an AFWERX StratFi as well? So for instance, if I think what the firm is asking here is if they were awarded AFWERX StratFi as a phase 2 sequential, could they also be eligible for a Catalyst award later?
I don't believe so. So, you know, for every SBIR project, a company can have one phase 1 award and up to 2 phase 2 awards. Of course, each of those phase 2 awards can come from different agencies. They don't have to be from the originating agency. That being said, we're still limited to 2. So if a company, and the way, you know, the Air Force StratFi program typically works, it is a sequential phase 2, so it would be a second phase 2 award. So we cannot have a third phase 2 award or additional funding on another award, right? I mean, if the project was started in the Air Force and there was a first phase 1 award, sorry, a first phase 2 award, then certainly the second award could be a Catalyst award through the Army. Or similarly, if there's an existing Army sequential phase 2 award, let's say, you know, with a base award of like $2 million, then we can have a Catalyst enhancement on there, but we cannot utilize our Catalyst enhancement on a base award that's not issued by the Army. Hope that answers the question.
Yes, I believe so. Right. Right, I'm going to go back. So we have a couple here. So if a company is, I think that we kind of answered this question. So another one asked if a company is currently in an award window of a program like StratFi, are they eligible for Catalyst? So again, I think that would fall under the same scenario. But if for some reason you weren't selected for StratFi and there is an Army transition partner, it could potentially come over. No, I believe. Nicole or Dr. Wilson, anything to add there?
No, I agree.
Okay. So this person says, I've had U.S. Air Force and OSD OTST SBIRs, but not from the Army, not with the Army. What is the best way to find an Army transition office?
Nicole, I mean, I would say, you know, the first recommendation I would give is that the Army has our Office of Small Business Programs in HQDA is a great resource for small businesses that have a capability or have a technology and are trying to do customer discovery to identify, are there stakeholders or are there users within the Army? And so they can help you, small businesses, connect with Army customers. I think that's the easy place to start. I mean, our office can certainly help as well, but you know, that's the primary OSBP mission, is to help small businesses, you know, navigate through the Army ecosystem and find potential transition partners.
Thanks, Dr. Willis. When you say a strong support letter, are you looking for actual commitment of funds communicated from the transition partner and integrators, or language that would suggest they would look to budget for a Catalyst project?
So for that, Nicole, it would be, we would accept either. But again, just as I mentioned, the stronger the support, the more likely of selection. So again, we're looking for, you know, basically the either transition partner or that integrator who said we are budgeting for funding. There's a high aperture for these funds to come through. More that those would be more apt to be selected versus one that's just like going, we really like this project, we might have some funds.
Okay, thank you. Can integrators bring contract dollars to a Catalyst application? Or if not, what are the restrictions on monies an integrator can bring?
So for funding from the integrator, we can't dictate what those funds look like, but we also recommend for the integrator, you know, they have to report back what they use those funds for. So with the funding coming from the integrator, we're just looking that there was dollars from one group to the small business. So we really can't say, no, you can't use these type of funds, but we also have to make sure that the funding that is being used is being done ethically, and this the integrator, of course, would be making that final determination on that.
Thank you. Where can they find deeper description of the tech priority areas? I believe we have those in a couple of their decks, and maybe we can send that out. But anything you want to speak to there specifically, Nicole?
Oh, sure. Actually, I think it might be on the Catalyst webpage, but that if not, we can definitely make sure that that is included. I didn't realize until I was going through the slides just prior to this that I didn't have that in there. So I will make sure it gets updated so when these slides go out, that those 5 areas are clearly articulated.
And yeah, I would reiterate, our website has all this information. So armysibr.army.mil, and then there's a tab on there specific to the Catalyst program.
Okay, perfect. There's a couple questions, and I'm going to there's 3 different ones that kind of come together. So one is, how many awards are we anticipating for FY25? And then is that in total, or is it for each phase, being a phase 2 sequential or a phase 2 enhancement?
So the Army, we've allocated 15 or 20% of our program per year for this. So it sort of depends on the total scope of the awards, but typically it's around 5-ish total awards per year, but we have some flexibility in terms of what that looks like overall.
Okay, thanks. There was another question on contradicting information on whether they could have a sequential phase 2 or if they request a Catalyst award if we have phase 2s from other agencies. So I think I can kind of talk to it really quick. So if you have a phase 2 from, say, the Navy or the Air Force, and you have an Army transition partner that has identified that, and you have not received 2 phase 2 awards, so either a DP2 and a phase 2 sequential or a regular phase 2 and a phase 2 sequential, if you've not received both of those, then you could be eligible for the Catalyst phase 2 award. And then so that could come over from the other agency. But if you have already received 2 awards, 2 phase 2 awards under the Air Force, such as Strat-Fi, where you've maxed out what you can get through the SBIR program, we would not be able to award a Catalyst off of that. Nicole or Dr. Willis, anything to add there?
Nope.
No, ma'am.
All right. Can multiple small businesses work together to enhance a phase 1 or phase 2 once a transition partner and integrator are identified?
Absolutely. I mean, certainly. I mean, and that's true for any SBIR project, except that, of course, there has to be one lead small business. But that small business can certainly partner with one or more other firms, small or large. That would be a sub on the contract, but that's absolutely permissible.
Okay. What is the requirement for the $1 million base award? Can that time be used to line up the transition partner and an integrator?
Yeah, so that's the design here, right? So I think that one big difference between the Catalyst program and the Air Force Strat-Fi program, right, is that before the Air Force announces those awards, there's, a build-up period of, 6 to 12, 24 months, basically coalescing all this partnership between the small business, the capital provider, and the Air Force transition partner or customer. And so those awards are issued at the full amount up front. The difference with the Catalyst program, right, is that we're essentially issuing this base award, this base phase 2 award of $1 million, 6 to 12 months period of performance, which allows time for the small business to, as Nicole said, build up and strengthen and finalize any of those relationships with those transition partners, with that integrator, so that we can essentially hit go whenever in terms of that enhanced amount. So it's just a little bit different approach, right? And then we're providing this base award to get started, vice having the full award at day one. But again, that enhancement piece can be activated really whenever during that 1 year base award. And as Nicole mentioned, we've had some cases bringing together the right coalescence of folks to activate those enhancements, those catalyst enhancements, where if we need to extend the period of performance, we can. Again, the big changes in FY25, and I'll reiterate, in the last, well, real quick, we can certainly answer more questions if there are any, but is we're trying to make the program more flexible and more agile. So having this base period of performance where we can activate this enhancement at any time, and then having the composition of these matching funds be a bit more realistic, i.e., potentially coming from venture capital sources, private capital, in kind, etc. So again, it's really all designed to be a bit more flexible and agile to support small businesses, really to accelerate capabilities. Over.
Thanks. I think we have time for just a couple more. So there's one specific question from a firm who is looking at, so they're in a phase 2 right now, looking for potentially submitting a phase 2 sequential soon. They're asking if that disqualifies them from pursuing the Catalyst phase 2 Catalyst sequential. And so I'm going to go back to this slide, and then Nicole, do you want to answer that one?
So yes, they're going to the phase 2 sequential right now. Is that what you stated?
Yeah. So
okay.
they're likely to submit a phase 2 sequential proposal soon, and they're asking, so does that totally disqualify them from being able to do a Catalyst award?
Oh, absolutely not. That's exactly one reason why we have this second part to the Catalyst structure. So sometimes, as it sounds like your particular firm, you need to go forward and do some additional R&D. That's why we have the sequential or second phase 2. We need to move it further along the TRL plane. So at the end of that, usually I would suggest around 6 months towards the end of that, if you guys are ready, you start moving forward with that transition partner, you got them on board, the integrator, that's a great time to start working forward to the Catalyst. The only difference between the regular Catalyst structure and because you've already received your sequential or second phase 2, there is no base period. So you'd have to come to the table with that transition partner and the integrator, both with funds at the time of award. So once you're selected, usually it's a couple months later that those funds would have to hit the CCOE to be able to put those on. So we'd have to have proof that those funds came through from that integrator, and then funding would have to reach our CCOE, MIPPEred over to our contracting center so that they could be put on contract. So that's the only difference. There just is no base award, and you would only receive up to 14 million versus the 15 million in the regular scenario.
Thanks, Nicole. Awesome. So I think there's just a couple things in the questions that I'll kind of wrap up together. So we have informed the Army POs and Army customers. There was an internal Army kickoff earlier this week, so they are aware that this exists. Again, if they have any questions as you're talking to your TPOCs, feel free to redirect them to our mailbox and we can get them looped in on Catalyst, get them access to that government kickoff slide deck and recording if that's something that they are not aware of yet. I think we're right about that time. So I did also see that looking at the technology areas, we will look at putting something together to get that into the deck when we send it out so that you can look more closely at the technology areas with some deeper guidance, as it does seem like it's high level on the website at this point. Nicole Fox, anything as we go to wrap up?
Nothing else for me. Just looking forward to seeing some great applications in the next few months.
Thanks, Nicole. Dr. Willis, anything before we close?
No, I'll just say, thanks again for folks listening in today. Again, this is designed to help you help us, right? And we're trying to provide sizable investments to really take, SBIR-derived technologies and accelerate them towards scale and towards transition. So looking forward to FY25. Certainly reach out if you have any additional questions. We're here to help. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.